Upper St. Clair, an oral history, is brought to you by your friends and neighbors at the Community Foundation of Upper St. Clair, the Upper St. Clair Township Historical Society, and the students and staff of the Upper St. Clair School District. It has become increasingly important to put on paper the knowledge of those elders still with us today, about the past, the way they experienced it. There is an urgent need to collect and publish this traditional information so the children of today can identify themselves with their relatives from the past. Children today desperately need to know their cultural background and history so they can be proud of themselves.
Upper St. Clair is a good place. I wouldn't have stayed here that long. And they want me to move now, and I don't want to move. I says they're going to carry me out of Beadley.
Places where people went back then, in Upper St. Clair, you'd go to the moose shop.
And one of my cousins ran out. We were in the midst of dinner, ran out to see what was the matter. And he come in, he was all white, and he said that an airplane just crashed in the field up the road.
And for $10, I worked every weekend as a constable. And he gave me a gun. I couldn't hit the side of a building with it.
She had a club about 3 feet long and 4 inches wide and a half-inch thick. And she beat you over the neck right here beside down over the neck, you know, where it hurt most.
Oral history is a collection of knowledge gained through interviews that help us learn about a person or people's history. This type of history can't be found in a traditional history book. It's the stories of people's lives. It's about their life experiences, where they grew up, and how they made a living. This is the information that's important to a culture. It shows how changes have occurred over the years. The Upper St. Clair Oral History Project brings to life the rich traditions, struggles, accomplishments, failures, and successes in the lives of the people of Upper St. Clair. Oral history tells you less about events, but more about life's meaning for Upper St. Clair. With an oral history, there are many perspectives on the past. There are themes and variations, shared and conflicting stories. Meanings may vary between the narrator and the listener. These histories provide perspective, nuance, detail, reflection, and assessment, not objective truths. The Upper St. Clair Oral History Project seeks to present the community and be honest about the complexities and conflicts of people's lives so that we may all learn from their experiences. The township of Upper St. Clair was one of 7 original townships in Allegheny County. It's named for a man who probably never stepped foot inside the township boundaries. Historian Dave Batchelor is a longtime resident of Upper St. Clair. He has taught history for more than 3 decades in western Pennsylvania. Batchelor has extensively researched the life of the township's namesake, Arthur St. Clair.
The research that we have done has not provided or revealed any evidence that he ever passed through St. Clair Township.
Arthur St. Clair was the only major general from Pennsylvania to serve in the Revolutionary Army. He spent many days on the battlefield before and after the Revolutionary War.
Historians have long overemphasized the 2 defeats of St. Clair in battle and ignored his many contributions to an infant and developing nation of great diversity and complexity. Arthur St. Clair had his detractors and critics, yet he was a man of action. He was a dedicated patriot and soldier. He served faithfully as a public official on national, state, and local levels. He supervised the building of fortifications, roads, and homesteading. He was a friend and spokesman of several Pennsylvania Indian tribes.
St. Clair played a key role in the well-known crossing of the Delaware, and most historians give him credit for the sneak attack on the Hessians Christmas Eve. That act was later depicted in this picture of a stoic George Washington standing as the boats crossed the icy Delaware River. Public office was a constant in Arthur St. Clair's life. He served as president of the Continental Congress and was governor of the Northwest Territories. St. Clair began his early career as a land surveyor, amassing some 8,000 acres of the best land in western Pennsylvania, none of it in Upper St. Clair Township.
At the present time, there is no reason to believe, on the evidence we now have, that he ever was in Upper St. Clair. Yet the township bears his name in the honor of his reputation and life.
While the township flourished, Arthur St. Clair did not. His military and political life left him deep in debt, and his final days were spent in disgrace. Only later were his contributions to the developing nation honored. And so begins the history of Upper St. Clair.
As the rebels went by, they marked his barn for destruction and burning on their return because he refused to cooperate with them. Fortunately, on their return, they were drunk and they forgot what they were going to do, and they passed it by and the barn was saved.
Drunken rampages through the streets, setting barns on fire, chasing public officials through the woods. The Whiskey Rebellion was underway right here in Upper St. Clair. Before it was over, Thomas Jefferson's warnings about fierce resistance to the tax would come true, and Upper St. Clair would have its own place in history. The Whiskey Rebellion has been called more than just a tax revolt. It was a battle for a young nation and a new constitution, fought in the streets and valleys of western Pennsylvania. Taxes had long been a part of farming life in early America, including taxes on whiskey. But Pittsburgh was still considered the frontier in the late 1700s, and whiskey tax collection was uncommon. Life at the edge of civilization was rough. Most of the population of farmers worked hard and lived simply. The major export from the region was whiskey. To the cities in the east, it was as good as gold. The Whiskey Rebellion began rather innocently as a renewed effort by the federal government to collect the profitable whiskey tax. The law called for the tax to be collected in cash, but farmers used the whiskey for barter and were cash poor. Tensions grew.
When these men gathered at Fort Couch, they were, of course, in a very angry mood. They were ready to set out and do anything necessary to take care of the tax collectors and to stop the payment of these taxes.
That anything happened when warrants were served on those ignoring the tax. For farmers, that meant a long trip to Philadelphia for a court hearing, while their crops rotted in the field. Shots flew in the direction of the tax collector, and he scrambled back to his house. The rebellion was on. An angry mob assembled at Fort Couch and made their way across the township towards the house of John Neville.
Once they crossed over where Painter's Run is and went up the hill on the other side, they were now on John Neville's property, and he was the excise tax collector, and they were out to get him.
A siege began. Neville armed his servants and slaves. His wife and daughters lay on the floor loading rifles for the battle. Neville was holed up in his house for a day before help arrived. The rebels were 500 strong when a small relief party of 11 federal soldiers faced off against the rebels. The troops were heavily outnumbered by the rebels and didn't offer much resistance. But fortunately for Neville, the brief interruption by the soldiers was enough, and he escaped out the back door and fled into the woods.
The rebels then decided on the 17th that there was nothing else to do but to burn the place. So they began to set fire to some of the outbuildings just at dusk. They then broke into the house, which was now empty. They broke up the furniture and set the house on fire. All of Neville's horses and livestock were shot. They removed the whiskey, which he had in his own distillery, and began to drink it. This, of course, made matters worse because now you have not only a rebellious crowd, you have a drunken rebellious crowd.
It may have been the whiskey that saved another family's barn. Two Upper St. Clair pioneers, Alexander Gilfillan and Christian Lesnett, refused to join the rebellion. Apparently they had decided that John Neville was too good of a friend to shoot, and remained at home. With Neville gone and his estate in ruins, the party broke up. The mob had planned to burn down the Gilfillans' barn as revenge for not participating. But as they passed the barn on their way home, alcohol got the best of them, and they forgot to set it on fire. The rebellion in Upper St. Clair and western Pennsylvania flickered and was extinguished by the threat of an invasion by federal troops. But for the region, it had a lasting impact. A young government showed it could force its citizens, even in the frontier of Upper St. Clair, to obey its laws. When the whiskey tax was quietly repealed years later, few people even took notice.
Few activities smack of community spirit more than a barn raising. The building of a barn meant a whole community was gathering for a single goal. Months of planning took place prior to the event to ensure a sturdy framework. Barns could be 60 feet long and 40 feet wide. To put together such a massive undertaking, you had better invite all of your friends and relatives. Barn raising was an all-day event, with a lot of work and plenty of community spirit. The work could also be dangerous. Ropes were used to right oak timbers weighing hundreds of pounds. One slip and the results could be disastrous. The following is Eleanor Gilfillan's account of her family's barn raising. It took place in 1868.
For a long time before the barn was started, Father was drawing plans. When the location was decided on, he and Mr. Williams, the carpenter, went to our woods and marked the oaks to be used for the framework. The barn was to be 40 by 60 feet, and the long sills and beams were cut and hauled by oxen to the sawmill in the village. The great day was set for June, when the days were longest, and almost 100 men gathered. Father always liked plenty of help. All the heavy timbers were raised by hand, men pulling on ropes until each piece was in place and a stout oak pin driven in. Very dangerous work, as the slip of a rope or some slight miscalculation, and no one could tell what might happen. Many of the wives came to help in the house, and dinner and supper were served at long tables in the grape arbor. I remember I was swinging in the backyard with two little girls when Uncle Andy came through the gate and said it was finished and no one was hurt, which was a great thing. Afterwards it was talked of, how well it was planned, not one timber too long or too short, and each raised to its right place.
It's a twisting and shadowy path that leads up McMillan Road from McLaughlin Run. Driving it today gives you the feeling of an ominous past. Is this the most dangerous place in Upper St. Clair? And how did it come to be known as Shades of Death? There are many rumors. Did snakes once rule the narrow stretch? Or did criminals lay in wait here for unsuspecting travelers? Did the dark provide covering for those who wanted to live no more? Or did a terrible accident take place here? There are many stories as to how the road gained its odious title. The first theory involves some slithering undesirables.
You know, they say the Shades of Death was so many people died. It wasn't that. It was that there were so many snakes, rattlesnakes in Shades of Death. And that's why they called it the Shades of Death.
If it wasn't the snakes, then it may have been some thugs preying on passers-by.
The reason they called that McMillan Road area the Shades of Death is that the miners were paid in cash. You know, they didn't have any checks back then. And first they would, on payday, I think one of the, there were probably one or two large companies that owned most of the mines in this area, but they would pay the miners in cash, and they came out on horse and buggy. And when they left the Beeling mine, that paid those employees their money, they would come down what is now McMillan Road, and they were robbed. They were held up and robbed. In fact, one person, I understand, was killed there, and there was one of the holdups. The person got killed.
The next theory says it wasn't the muggers, but rather some solitary souls visiting the shades.
As you go maybe a quarter of a mile, it's all overgrown with trees. And there was a rumor, I suppose, that at one time a man had committed suicide by hanging from one of those trees. So they called it Shades of Death.
It could have been the sharp curves and shady corners that led to a terrible end for some motorists.
It was a very shadowed valley, and it was the site of another of the tragic accidents in our community when a couple of our young ladies who were going to Young Life one night, instead of going into the meeting at one of their homes, went out joyriding with a couple of boys, and they were speeding down Shades of Death, hit a bridge concrete abutment, and tore the car in two, and the two young ladies in the back were killed instantly.
Which one is the real reason the road is called Shades of Death? No one is sure. However, there is one final but less dramatic idea. The road is narrow, and a thick canopy of trees shades the area.
So I walk up through the Shades of Death. I'll tell you, it was scary. It was really scary. It was dark. The dark wagon trail, and the trees are overlapping over top of each other, and those doggone birds would make noises. You'd think it was somebody rattling through the trees after you, I ran up that hill a lot of times.
I did too. That was a scary thing, but they always called it the Shades of Death, and I never found out why.
Because it was shady in the sunshine.
It's still a pretty place to go through. I think that's the prettiest spot down in there.
We put up hay on Orr Farm a couple of years, and I had to drive a team of horses up and down through the Shades of Death. I'd make a move, boy. I don't know why, but it was scary.
The legend may have just been superstition and rumor that made the residents believe evil lurked here. We'll leave the final say up to you.
I fought so hard to get that bell back, so he always calls that Nell's bells.
The clang of a bell can be heard for a great distance. So years ago, bells were a good way to communicate between the hills and the valleys of Upper St. Clair. Each home would have a distinctive bell, with a distinctive ring, to let the children know it was time for dinner. The schools also had bells to announce the start and end of the school day. It was the ring of a particular bell that called to one Upper St. Clair resident, and it would take her on a search to hear that distinctive clang again.
Took the bell out of the tarn, it seemed to disappear. Well, I searched for that bell.
Nellie DeLatch spent her school years at Macmillan School. She came and went each day according to the ringing of the school bell. When that bell disappeared during the conversion of Macmillan School to St. John Capistrano Church, she decided to find it.
Doc Skinner was the one, he worked with the township commissioners and things, and he was the instigator that got us the school for our church. And then we worked and made our church there. And in renovating the church, the school to the church, well, then they took the contractor, took the bell out of the tarn. It seemed to disappear. Well, I searched for that bell, and I found the contractor had it in his front yard. Well, I argued and fought, and I got the bell because that's the only artifact of beadling in Upper St. Clair we have, and it's back in our church tower. We got that church bell back, and then we got two, matched to have 3 bells in the church, and then Father Harcaric was there at the time, and I know I fought so hard to get that bell back, so he always calls that Nell's bells in our tire.
When the Second World War began, many people were called into duty. Upper St. Clair, like other towns, lost many of its children in the war. Pictures of the beadling soldiers who lost their lives were displayed in the Upper St. Clair Hotel. The hotel was owned by Nellie DeLatch. The hotel wall also displayed this poem written by Millie Gorney. It is written in honor of those killed while serving their country, and for those that were still fighting.
It doesn't make much difference now about his name, who he is or what he was, or from where he came. He may have been your sweetheart, a husband or a brother, or he might have been a son who somewhere has a mother. The important thing is that he died out on a waste of sand in such poignant loneliness without the touch of a loving hand. Missing in action, just an obscure line in a communique, that was all. But he lies there. You're still here today. Last night he died in such utter, unspeakable desolation for you, so you might live in a freedom-loving nation. The pain was terrible enough, but then there had to be the memory of Mom and Dad, his last farewell to Marie, the roadster in the driveway, the picnic with his gal, the very familiar bark of his faithful dog, Old Pal. All those plans for the future. Couldn't someone find him, please? Then that racking pain again. No, he didn't die with ease. Too much for you, all this? But it really happened last night, and still again tomorrow it'll be another's plight. But you're still here, protected, loved and clothed and fed. You happen to be much luckier than the thousands who are dead. Maybe you could have helped that boy, the one who died last night, by buying an extra bond or two. Sounds fantastic, but it's right. If we would just grind into our thinking, think about it today, every petty selfish interest would surely be swept away. Let's sacrifice everything and anything, help to win this fight. Let's make ourselves worthy of that boy who died last night.
Losing something and finding it again is common to all of us. Losing something extremely valuable, that's another story. But what makes this next story extraordinary is the amount of time involved.
It's an unusual thing.
Del Lesnick's grandmother lost her wedding ring one night while she was doing the dishes. After a couple of years without any luck, she gave up on finding it.
She dropped her ring, and she didn't have any idea where it was. And after we bought the house, Mrs. Nichols, who lives down below us, the water was still running. They diverted the spring away from the kitchen and put city water in. And Mrs. Nichols called me, and she had some goldfish in a little pond there where the stream ran down, a little small stream. She had goldfish in there, and she's fooling around with the goldfish, and she saw a gold circle and dug it out with a stick. I'm telling you how she happened to see it. She just happened to see it looking at her goldfish, and she dug it out with a stick and called me and told me what she had and said it's got a bunch of writing and initials and everything, and I can't make it out. So here it was, my grandmother's wedding band. I find out afterwards that my grandmother had lost her ring. And she, after they were married about a year, I've worn it. Yeah, I wear it. I think it's so rare that, it's an unusual thing.
It was during the Civil War that mail service to Upper St. Clair became a regular event. Anxious families would wait for news and letters from their loved ones. The Civil War had been raging for 2 years when John M. Boyce wrote the following letter to his family in Upper St. Clair. It would be 2 years later before he would return home.
Camp Bayard, March 15th, 1863. Dear Father, I received your letter of the 3rd some time ago, and as I owed one to Margaret, I delayed answering yours, as I answered hers but a short time ago. We have had very changeable weather in this month, and even now the sleet is rattling on the canvas that is between us and the elements, while the distant wall of thunder can be heard audibly in the heavens, which startles us from our reverie, making us think that it is the roar of cannon, and that we might be summoned at any time to gird on our armor and go marching along. But as the intonations are of a protracted kind, we come to the conclusion that it is not man's artillery that is startling us, but the artillery of heaven. We received a Tribune of March the 7th, and it afforded us much reading matter, and we snatch at everything that is readable, as it is hard to be obtained in the Grand Army of the Potomac. And every one you send will be accepted with much gratitude. We are both well and comfortably seated before a cheery fire, while the sleet is trying to break through our thin barrier, but I think that it will fail. You seem to be much dispirited because we are not as comfortable as we would be if we were at home. But you must recollect that we are to fight for the best government that is on earth, and I trust that you are not unwilling to sacrifice us, if needs be, for its sustenance. For in the language of an ancient, would that we had better die as free men than to live all slaves to a despotism blacker than ever existed. You should be proud of your offering, and pray that it will be the will of him who doeth all things well, that we may safely return to you. Hoping that you will be of lighter heart despite your afflictions, and that a happy day will be in store for us all, I remain your affectionate son, John M. Boyce. Write soon.
7 months after writing the letter, Boyce was wounded in the Battle of Mine Run. The bullet struck him in the leg and is now part of the display in the Grand Army of the Republic Room at the Carnegie Library. John Boyce recovered from his wound and returned to active duty. During the Battle of White House Landing in June of 1864, Boyce was captured. The letter's home stopped, and his family began to worry. The following is a letter from his father asking for information on his son's whereabouts.
Harrietsville, August 17, 1864. Colonel William Hoofman. Dear Sir, at the Battle of White House on the 21st of June, 1864, Corporal John M. Boyce of Company K, 1st Regular Pennsylvania Cavalry of General Gregg's division, is among the missing. And since then, no information of him can be found. Supposing him to be a prisoner, I address you as Commissioner of Prisons, hoping to gain the information of his whereabouts, or any advice or information that would lead to his discovery will be thankfully received by me, his father. Yours truly, John Boyce.
Civil War prisons were rough places, and many people died while incarcerated. John Boyce attempted to escape from prison, but was recaptured and moved to the Andersonville prison in Georgia, notorious for its horrible conditions. By November, 5 months after his capture, John Boyce's health was failing. Boyce was fortunate to get release papers from a comrade who died in prison. He was discharged from the Army in February of 1865 after almost 4 years of service.
One of the keys to understanding Upper St. Clair is to look at the politics of the township. For the past 50 years, Upper St. Clair has been known as a Republican stronghold. As Margaret Gilfillan, a lifelong resident, said, "Being a Democrat in Upper St. Clair is like being a foreigner." In talking with people for the Oral History Project, we came across a resident with a rather unique political distinction. His name is Paul Iben. He was one of the USC Township Commissioners pictured here, a post he held from 1958 to 1962.
I was the last Democratic commissioner in Upper St. Clair.
His story is even more unique, considering the way he won.
The election, there was 250 people voted. When they counted the votes, each one of us had 125. The Republican who ran against me, he was there, and so were the other big shots. And they said, well, let's recount them. So they recounted the votes, and found out that there was 3 votes that were given to him that belonged to me. So I beat him by 6 votes. So I was the last Democratic commissioner in Upper St. Clair.